So hello, welcome to the video and welcome to Manila Airport. Flight 2 of 3 for me today, and in about an hour's time I'll be flying from here to Bahrain with Gulf Air, continuing from Bahrain on to Jeddah in Saudi Arabia. Business class all the way, and I have to say this is probably the flight I've been most looking forward to on this trip. And that's because Gulf Air took the very sensible decision to install Apex suites on its fleet. That's the 6 abreast, all-aisle access seating that gives you ample personal space, a huge flat bed and no foot cubby. I flew it with Oman Air coming in the opposite direction, and I'm very interested to see how Gulf Air has deployed the seat in their cabins. So I did a self-connection in this morning. That means I flew in on a different airline to that which I flew out on, and that's not without risk, because if your first flight is delayed, the airline operating your second flight will have no idea where you are and will just assume that you haven't shown up. You'll then be in their hands as to how generous they're prepared to be to get you back on track again. Now, I picked a 6 a.m. flight from my origin this morning, and early flights tend to be more reliable because there's been less of the day for delays to accumulate, and sure enough the flight was bang on time. I still allowed myself about 4.5 hours to change planes here in Manila, and that proved to be ample. So it worked for me, but always be cautious if you schedule yourself a self-connect. Right, so if you'd like to see what the check-in experience and the lounge was like, and what the rest of the flight is going to be like, then stick around.
Hi, I'm Matt and this is Matt's Planet. I aim to entertain, educate and inspire with my travel adventures from planning to execution. I'll show you how you can travel in style for a lot less than you'd think. So subscribe so you can come with me. I'd flown in on Cebu Pacific from Puerto Princesa. My review of that experience is here. I'd picked Cebu Pacific in part because they arrived into the same terminal that Gulf Air departs from. Changing terminals in Manila is a right pain. As check-ins usually open 3 hours before departure, I'd walked very slowly from arrivals up to the departures level and was really shocked to see that Gulf Air's check-in was already open and doing good business nearly 4 hours before departure. I'd expected to have to hang around for an hour or so until the desks opened, but nope, they were off and running already. Check-in was a little complicated. I'd scheduled myself another self-connect in Jeddah, and even though I had a multi-entry Saudi visa, I was intending to stay airside and had booked a transit hotel. I'll talk about this more in a future video, but it was all a bit confusing and I have to say I wouldn't recommend it. The agent asked to see proof of my flight on from Jeddah and ended up taking a photo of it, so Gulf Air had some evidence that it wasn't depositing a random person at the Saudi border, even though I had a Saudi visa. Looking back, I'm not sure I made everything as clear as I could have to the check-in agent, and things ended up being more complicated than they perhaps needed to. I don't think anyone in their right mind would have scheduled the flights I had, but as you'll know by now, I'm not really in my right mind. But we got there in the end, and 2 boarding passes were duly produced, Manila to Bahrain, then Bahrain to Jeddah. Immigration. I should probably read emigration when I think about it, but it was very quick that morning, as was security, less than 5 minutes in total, and I was then off to the lounge. This is Manila's Terminal 3, the newest of the 3 you'll find there. This terminal was actually built before I lived in Manila in 2005, but didn't fully open until 2014, as there were all sorts of disputes over its construction, so this was actually the first time I'd used it. It's nice enough, but it's not going to become anyone's favourite. The lounges are all on the upper level. There's a few of them actually, and Gulf Air uses the contract Pag Stop lounge right at the end, which is not the pinnacle of lounge offerings, it has to be said. The list of schemes providing access was lengthy, and the lounge was busy when I arrived. I eventually found a seat in the rear section of the lounge, although there was a really annoying mechanical racket coming from some equipment up that end, so I was able to move to a more comfortable space closer to the entrance when the first departing flight was called and the lounge's occupancy thinned out somewhat. This was around 9 a.m, so clearly breakfast time, but the food offering was somewhat eclectic. Cereals,
and then noodles and pasta with dim sum on the end. And at the other end of the lounge was another station with mostly sweet items, cakes and the like, with a San Miguel Light beer tap tucked away. Ice cream was also available, as was some laksa soup. As I said, it was an eclectic mix, particularly for breakfast. And that's an observation rather than a complaint, let me make clear. Soft drinks and bottled water in the fridge. Then tucked away here was a very limited range of spirits, some Johnny Walker Black Label and Absolute, although the rest of the offering was made up of local brands. I had a couple of hours there and it was okay, but I'd not rushed to the airport early to experience it. Indeed, I left the lounge earlier than I might otherwise to record that intro and to see the inbound plane arriving, a 6-year-old 787-9 Dreamliner, as Boeing has ambitiously branded this plane type. The inbound flight was a little delayed, so it took a while before boarding started, and it was all rather chaotic. Almost every passenger was pressing forward, and the gate space was not big to start out with. There was next to no organisation, very limited announcements, no boarding groups on boarding passes, and it was really not clear as to what was expected. I like to get on first so I can film the cabin before anyone else boards, so I joined the initial throng surging forwards, and when I reached the barrier the plan did become a little clearer. Economy passengers were being allowed through to buffer in the lengthy boarding finger and the belief that that would speed up boarding when the plane was finally ready for us. Business passengers were asked to stay in this area just beyond the checkpoint. It really wasn't a premium experience, it has to be said. We stood there for about 10 minutes, then an agent collected us premium passengers and led us down to the plane, through the buffered economy passengers who very obligingly parted to allow us through. This was without doubt the strangest boarding experience I can remember encountering. Wheelchair passengers were then given the nod, and then finally it was our turn. All a bit chaotic, but it sort of worked. Mostly, I think, as the majority of passengers were Filipinos who were polite and obliging. I can't imagine the strategy of having premium customers overtake others inside the boarding finger would have worked in other less courteous parts of the world. But in the end, I was the first passenger to make it into the 4-row business cabin with the 222 layout of the Apex Suite seats. This layout works as the window seats are offset slightly, affording aisle access through these little pathways. Seat 1A for me today. A champagne was rapidly in my hand. That was a used napkin the cleaners had missed. Absolutely no complaints about this. It was really cold and was a super refreshing way to settle in after that somewhat fraught boarding experience. Cheers! I've talked about this seat a few times now. It's the same as I'd flown with Oman Air outbound to the Philippines. It's 6 abreast, so you do sacrifice some width versus herringbone style layouts, but the seat is long, it's really long, and offers a fully flat bed without the need of a foot cubby. And if there's still not enough legroom, that seat extension can be folded away, something Oman Air's seat didn't do, although I'm not sure how helpful a feature it is. This was a 6-year-old plane, so presumably a 6-year-old seat, but wow, it was showing its age. Bashed up seat controls to the left, a remote to the right, with a smallish storage area beneath. Some more seat controls here, a magazine slot, and a slightly larger storage space up front, preloaded with a bottle of water. And some tape, presumably holding the seats together. No overhead air vents though, which is always disappointing and is perhaps unusual from an airline servicing primarily hot ports. A choice of hot or cold towels were offered, another nice touch actually. And a menu was delivered, a separate bar insert as is usual with Middle Eastern airlines. The best word to use here is underwhelming, from the lack of branding through to the quality of the paper used to the brevity of the descriptions of the options available. It was a menu that didn't even remotely excite you about what lay ahead. We pushed back, and as you may know, the 787's windows offer electronic tinting, and it was still locked on a partially darkened setting as the flight began. An Arabic coffee and a date were offered and accepted as we were taxiing, although this was done while the in-flight safety video was playing. I'm not sure that represented best practices. It was a little distracting. Tasty though. That safety video was in the cartoon genre. The windows were eventually lightened and it was time to say goodbye to Manila, bye-bye, and to take off on this 9-hour flight. We taxied past one of the two BA A380s that are usually in Manila being serviced, and after an hour's delay we were on our way up into a moody Manila afternoon. The tray table pops out of the armrest thusly. It's massive, it's extremely sturdy, and I think this pivoting design feature is intended to facilitate an exit from the seat with the table deployed, although I was neither skinny nor nimble enough to be able to do so. One design flaw is that the armrest above will not go flat if the tray is not fully secured beneath. That annoyed me for the first hour of the flight until I worked it out. I used the table to investigate the amenity kit, an unusual design with a focus on a galloping horse rather than on Gulf Air branding. But the contents were good, mouthwash and a tube of scent being unusual items to find in such kits these days. The flight was an eastbound day flight, scheduled to take off at 11:30 and land at 4:30 in the afternoon. Basically a daytime flight, and I was fully intending to stay awake to fully enjoy the experience. But very quickly after takeoff, the windows were dimmed again. Our meal orders had been taken whilst still on the ground, so I got the distinct impression the crew were keen to feed us and send us to sleep as quickly as possible so they could put their feet up, and that's pretty much how the flight transpired. I did ask to retain control of my own window shades though, a request that was granted for the first hour or so of the flight. And quite quickly after takeoff a drink was delivered, again ordered on the ground. I went for a gin and tonic, Gibson gin actually, served with some nuts. It was a decent pour of spirit too. And lunch arrived very shortly after, the Vietnamese spring rolls for me to start, served on a mound of red cabbage with some garlic bread. Nice enough, but it was quite bland and it really wasn't an ambitious dish. Then I went for the wok prawns. Nothing had really grabbed me on the menu, and this ended up being a decent choice. Substantial again, although it wasn't what you would call an ambitious dish. Served with some of the Tempranillo wine, which I discovered later had been served to me in a cracked glass. Dessert and liqueurs were then served from a trolley, which was actually a nice touch, although I abstained as the meal had been enough. And 100 minutes after the wheels left the runway, the service was done. The lights were off, the windows were locked, and the crew pretty much vanished. Just another 7 hours of the flight to go. This isn't how it should feel at about 2 in the afternoon on a daytime flight. Or at least I don't think it should be. I really dislike those windows. Let me moan about them some more. You can just about still see through them when they are fully darkened. This was looking directly at the sun. But there are eye shades in the amenity kit for those who want to sleep in the daytime. So I really dislike it when the crew decides for all of us when it is time to be awake or asleep. Earlier, when there still had been some light, I'd explored the in-flight entertainment options, best done via the handset as the screen is a long way away. An airline like Gulf Air needs to provide an offering which accommodates a wide range of nationalities and languages, so the English language options are always going to be a little narrower than you'll find on Western airlines, but I thought the range was decent enough, a good mix of classics and new releases. The screen was more in focus than this footage. The headphones were noise cancelling, good quality actually, even if you had to attach your own sanitary covers to them. The oddest plugging in mechanism I've ever seen too. I tried to watch a movie but ultimately decided to give in to the inevitable and had a nap. The bedding kits included a mattress topper. Well, that may be an exaggeration as it was quite a thin piece of material, but every little helps, I suppose. There was also a blanket, but without individual air vents it was really toasty, so I didn't feel the need to use it. The seat converts quickly into a flat bed. That control panel doesn't look nearly as smashed up in the dark. Perhaps that's why they do it. And for all the niggles I had about this flight, the bed is superb. I'm 6'4", that's £1.93 in new money, and I could comfortably lie fully flat. And although the seat is a little narrower than some, there's still plenty of shoulder room and hip width when flat. And in the window seats, the privacy is superb. Only 2 of the 6 seats in each row are windows. The other 4 are a little exposed to the aisle, it has to be said, although there is still some separation between the occupant and passing traffic. I slept for a bit and dozed for a bit. Then about 90 minutes before landing, the second meal came around. I asked for a tomato juice and some water and got 1 of the former, and for some reason I got 3 of the latter. The menu describes this as light refreshment, so using the word meal is definitely an overstatement here. This didn't look like either the cheese or the chicken coleslaw or multigrain bread options advertised on the menu, although the vegetable lumpia and chicken empanada were both recognisable. I think that was a vanilla cupcake. I have to say it was quite poor, all things considered, and I really would have hoped for something more imaginative. As with the main meal though, it was quite filling. For the last hour before the descent, I just sort of paced around the cabin, wishing I'd chosen another airline, and I'd had a choice of several between the Philippines and Saudi Arabia. We did fly overhead Dubai though, and I did get a glimpse of one of Dubai's oddest phenomena, the second Palm Island that was built, bigger than the first we all know about, but this one was never built out, and it's still there, just sitting there unused out the back of the container terminal. Odd. And eventually the lights came back on, the windows cleared and ironically were locked into the open position, and we came in to land at Bahrain Airport. So Gulf Air. It's a brilliant seat, even if mine was a bit bashed up, but as the seat is the most important element of any premium cabin flight, you have to score Gulf highly for their choice. The Apex Suite is a superb seat. Other than that, I was quite disappointed, which is a real shame as I was really looking forward to this flight, as I said in that intro. The ground experience was poor, the lounge was well below par, and the boarding experience was a bit of a shambles, even if I was pleased that the check-in desks opened so early. The onboard service started strongly, but once the doors closed it really wasn't great. Unadventurous food served in a rush, but at least there was quite a lot of it. I'd love to know if what we experienced was the service standard Gulf Air has designed, or if the crew pressed the fast forward button to give themselves as easy a flight as possible. And don't get me started on spending 8 of the 9 hours I had aboard in the pitch dark. At least it was cheap. I paid £820 for a one-way flight from Manila through to Jeddah, so the 9-hour business class experience on this flight cost me around £700. It's a disappointing experience compared to what other Middle Eastern airlines offer, but even so it was still excellent value for the price I paid, and it's always a privilege and a pleasure to fly in a premium cabin. I only had a little over an hour on the ground in Bahrain before my onward flights to Jeddah, a review of which will be along in a few weeks, but I have to say the Gulf Air ground experience was very good, and the onward flight was also really good. In fact, it's a bit of a mystery to me as to why the long-haul experience I've reported in this video was so out of line with the rest of the Gulf Air experience I had that day. So thanks for watching, I hope you enjoyed it. Give the video a like if you did, consider subscribing if you're new, and leave me a comment. Would you fly Gulf Air? Have you? And if you'd like to support what I'm doing more directly, there is a Patreon account, the link to which is below. So thanks again for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one. Bye bye.